Now over to what's happening in Whistler. For some interesting Canada news summaries, I'm Mike,
Hey, everyone.
and with me is Jane,
Hey.
and we've got a story that's got everyone talking.
It definitely is a head-scratcher.
You could say that, picture this. A fugitive from the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot is seeking asylum. In Whistler, no less.
Of all places. You think of stunning scenery and hitting the slopes, not exactly a haven for, well, let's call them politically controversial figures.
Right. Okay, so let's unpack this. The individual at the center of all this is Antony Vo, 33 years old, claiming he's facing political persecution from the Biden administration for his role in the January 6th events.
Vo was convicted of entering and demonstrating in a restricted area of the Capitol building, but he insists he was peaceful and is holding out for a pardon from Trump. And he even went as far as providing documentation to CTV News showing he entered Canada, what they call irregularly, and filed a refugee claim.
Irregularly. Now, that's an interesting choice of words. Basically, he's saying he didn't go through the usual channels of entering the country, which, raises the question, how does someone with a criminal conviction for being part of something as high-profile as the Capitol riot just slip into Canada and file for asylum?
Well, we spoke to veteran immigration lawyer Richard Kurland, and surprisingly, he wasn't all that shocked by Vo's move. He explained that Canada's asylum process is notoriously slow, often taking years to make a decision. That means applicants can essentially live freely in Canada while they wait.
Okay, so that's a key point for you listening. Canada's asylum system operates on this principle of benefit of the doubt, essentially to protect applicants from potential harm if they were to be sent back to their home country before their case is fully heard.
Which on the surface sounds fair and just right,
Yeah.
but when you apply it to a case like Vo's where there's a conviction for participating in something as serious as the Capitol riot, it does make you wonder about the balance between protecting individuals and ensuring the integrity of the system itself.
Exactly. And Kurland went on to raise an even more thought-provoking point, Trump's plans for mass deportations.
Right. He cautioned that if those plans ever materialize, we could see a wave of people, not just those involved in the Capitol riot seeking refuge in Canada. It could potentially overwhelm our already stretched system. Kurland painted a pretty vivid picture, almost like caravans heading north, hoping to wait out a Trump administration.
Now think about that for a moment. And here's where it gets really interesting, or maybe even a little ironic. Canada, a country that prides itself on being welcoming and compassionate, might become a haven for individuals fleeing the U.S. Yet at the same time, we have countless Canadians struggling to bring their own family members into the country.
It really makes you question, doesn't it? What's the priority here? Who are we trying to protect? On one hand, you have individuals like Vo fleeing potential consequences for their actions. On the other, you have Canadians separated from their loved ones sometimes for years due to bureaucratic hurdles and seemingly endless wait times. It exposes the inconsistencies and sometimes even ethical dilemmas within our immigration policies.
It certainly does. And it's something we'll explore further in a bit. But first, let's delve deeper into Vo's case specifically. What might have motivated him to seek asylum in Canada? What are the chances his claim will actually be successful?
It's a fascinating psychological puzzle, isn't it? I mean, think about it. This guy, Antony Vo, participates in a major event that makes headlines globally, then decides to flee to another country.
It's bold, to say the least.
And risky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's facing potential jail time back home, yet he's putting his faith in a possible pardon from a former president. It makes you wonder what's going through his mind. Maybe a mix of desperation and defiance. On one hand, he's fleeing the consequences of his actions, but on the other, he seems convinced he's done nothing wrong, even going so far as to document his irregular entry into Canada.
It's almost like he's challenging the system, a catch-me-if-you-can kind of scenario.
Right.
And it brings us back to that inherent tension in the asylum system. The benefit of the doubt principle is designed to protect the vulnerable, but can it be exploited?
That's the question, isn't it? And it gets even trickier when you consider Kurland's warning about a potential surge in asylum seekers if Trump's deportation plans are put into action. I mean, the image of caravans heading north is pretty dramatic. Do you think he's being overly alarmist?
It's hard to say for sure. But even if the numbers aren't as drastic as Kurland predicts, the possibility of a significant increase in asylum claims is definitely something Canada needs to be prepared for. It raises questions about resources, logistics, and the potential strain on our social systems.
And it loops us right back to that glaring contrast we talked about earlier. Canada potentially becoming a haven for those fleeing the U.S., while simultaneously making it incredibly difficult for many Canadians to sponsor their own family members to come here.
It's a real head-scratcher, isn't it? You have Canadians jumping through hoops, navigating complex paperwork and lengthy processing times just to reunite with their loved ones. Meanwhile, someone like Vo, with a criminal conviction tied to a major political event, manages to enter the country irregularly and file an asylum claim with relative ease.
It almost feels like a double standard, doesn't it? And it makes you wonder, what message are we sending? Who are we prioritizing?
It definitely raises some uncomfortable questions about fairness and equity within our immigration system. If we truly value family reunification, shouldn't that be reflected in our policies and processes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the legal and logistical aspects. It's about the human impact, the emotional toll on families separated by borders and bureaucratic hurdles.
Exactly. Think about those families who are desperately trying to bring loved ones to Canada for a better life. For safety, for opportunity. They're playing by the rules, patiently waiting their turn, and sometimes facing agonizing delays.
And then you have a situation like Vo's, which, regardless of the outcome of his asylum claim, highlights the inconsistencies and complexities within our immigration system.
It definitely does, and it underscores the need for a more nuanced and transparent approach. An approach that balances compassion with accountability, security with fairness.
So where do we go from here? I mean, this story about Antony Vo in Whistler might seem like an isolated incident, but as we've discussed, it could be a sign of things to come. What can our listeners take away from all of this?
Yeah, it really is a lot, and it's easy to get caught up in all the legal stuff or the political side of things, but at the end of the day, this is about people.
Absolutely. Antony Vo, the people who could be affected by Trump's deportation plans, Canadian families waiting to be together again, these are real people with real stories.
And those are the stories we need to hear and try to understand.
Exactly. It's not just numbers and policies. It's about people's hopes and fears and what they want out of life, all tied up in these really complicated issues.
So as we wrap up this story from Whistler and what it means for Canada, I think what we really need to take away from all this is awareness. This isn't just something we'll forget about tomorrow. This is a conversation that needs to keep going.
Yeah, we need to be aware of the possible challenges, the things that aren't working in our own system, and the questions it makes us ask about what's right and wrong. And more importantly, we need to talk about it. Think about how we want our immigration policies to work in the future. How do we balance being compassionate with being realistic? How do we make sure things are fair for everyone?
Those are the tough questions, aren't they? And there's no simple answers. But by trying to understand how complicated it all is, by listening to each other, and by talking openly and honestly, we can hopefully create a system that shows what Canadians really believe in.
Well said. So to everyone listening, we'll leave you with this. What does it mean to be a welcoming country today? How can we make sure our immigration policies are both fair and kind? Take some time to think about that. Maybe do some research on your own. This is something that affects all of us, and it's worth talking about.